When it comes to the Vikings, they weren't just raiders, they weren't just legends. They were warriors forged in fire through frostbitten winters, brutal training, and endless battles across land and sea. But what was life really like for one of these fearsome Norse fighters? Today we peel back the saga and step into the worn boots of a Viking warrior. From dawn rituals to deadly raids, you're about to experience the blood, sweat, and steel that defined their world. The day began early. Whether they lived on a small farmstead or near a coastal jarl's hall, most Viking warriors were also farmers, hunters, or craftsmen. Survival off the battlefield was just as hard as on it. At sunrise, a warrior might be up tending animals, feeding goats or mucking out pig pens. Then came the grind of chores, splitting firewood, repairing fences or gathering provisions. But make no mistake, war was never far from their minds. Even during mundane tasks, weapons were close. After all, raids or rival clans could strike at any moment. In Egil's saga, the warrior poet Egil was said to have started training young, even while helping his father on the family farm in Iceland. By age 7, he had already killed a boy during a game with an axe. This wasn't play, it was preparation. Viking warriors weren't born fierce, they were forged. Training didn't happen in a barracks with instructors barking orders. It was baked into daily life, starting from the moment a boy could lift a stick. Imagine a rugged coastline village. Before the sun has fully risen, boys as young as 5 are already out, swinging carved wooden swords, copying their fathers, brothers, and uncles. For them, pretend battles weren't child's play. They were deadly serious rehearsals for a brutal future. By their teenage years, that stick becomes steel. Young warriors began sparring with real weapons, blunt at first, but enough to bruise. They practiced footwork on uneven terrain, learning to stay balanced in mud, snow, or on the deck of a rocking ship. They trained to fight while exhausted, starved, or cold, because that's what real combat demanded. Strength wasn't just about size, it was about endurance. Viking warriors trained by lifting massive stones, some over 300 pounds. These lifting stones still sit in parts of Iceland and Norway, each with a name, a legend, and a story of a man who proved his worth by hoisting it. They wrestled, not just for sport, but as a way to build close combat skill. Grappling could be the difference between life and death in a shield wall. Many Viking fighters could disarm an opponent just as quickly with a twist of the body as they could with a swing of an axe. And speaking of the shield wall, one of the most critical parts of training was mastering this iconic formation. Picture it, dozens of warriors shoulder to shoulder, each shield interlocked with the next. If one man faltered, the whole line could collapse. Drilling the shield wall wasn't glamorous. It was sweat, shouting, and splinters. Warriors would take turns battering the wall with blunt weapons while others held the line. They practiced moving in unison, bracing for impact, and rotating tired fighters out mid-battle. In the saga of the Jomsvikings, this legendary brotherhood was said to allow no man into their ranks unless he had proven himself in combat and in drills. Cowardice was not just frowned upon, it was punishable by death. One tale tells of a man who flinched during training. His comrades beat him senseless and threw him out of the warband. And while most warriors trained informally, through duels, hunting, or community brawls, some elite fighters took it further. There were warrior cults and bands like the Berserkers or the Ulfhednar, men who trained in isolation, fasted, meditated, and worked themselves into frenzied states. Their training wasn't just physical, it was spiritual and psychological. They aimed to become something more than human, something terrifying. So no, there weren't boot camps, but there was blood on the practice fields. There was pain, and there was purpose. Because when battle came, and it always did, a true Viking warrior had to be more than ready. He had to be unbreakable. When it came time to fight, a Viking warrior didn't just throw on some gear and grab the nearest axe. Every piece of equipment, every stitch, blade, and buckle mattered. Preparing for battle was a ritual, one part survival, one part identity, and one part legacy. Let's start with weapons. The spear was the most common weapon, not because it was cheap, but because it was versatile. With a reach of over 6 feet, it could be thrown from a ship's deck, thrust through shield walls, or wielded in a tight scrum. Many sagas refer to Odin himself hurling his spear Gungnir to begin great battles. Then there was the axe. Simple, brutal, effective. Whether single-handed or the fearsome Dane axe with its long shaft and heavy blade, the axe was beloved for a reason. It could cleave through armour, shields, even bone. Plus, it doubled as a tool, splitting logs when there wasn't a skull to split. The sword, on the other hand, was a status symbol. Owning one meant wealth, or having taken one from a dead foe. Viking swords were double-edged, often pattern-welded, with names engraved on the blades. These weren't disposable. They were heirlooms passed from father to son, wrapped in myth and honour. In Egil's Saga, the warrior poet wields a family sword called Dragvendil. He doesn't just use it, he talks to it, treats it with reverence. It was part of him, a sacred extension of his will. And of course there was the shield. Round, wooden, about a metre across, covered in leather or rawhide. The boss at the centre, a metal dome, could bash as well as block. Vikings painted their shields in bright colours and symbols, runes for protection, dragons for fear, or family emblems. Not just tools, shields were personal, like carrying a banner into battle. When it came to armour, forget the idea of mass-produced chainmail. Most warriors wore thick woolen tunics, layered with leather or fur. Those who could afford it might have a shirt of riveted iron rings. Helmets were far simpler than Hollywood would have you believe. No horns, ever. That myth? It came from 19th century operas, not history. Actual Viking helmets were iron, conical, and practical, some with nose guards, a few with faceplates. Most were functional, forged to protect, not impress. Then came the belt, a warrior's mobile toolkit. Knives, fire starters, pouches for flint, food or silver coins. Some carried bone combs or small hammers carved with Thor's symbol for protection. But gearing up wasn't just about strapping on metal, it was about preparing the soul. Some warriors fasted before battle, others carved runes onto their blades. A few even made peace with death, believing that if they died in glory, they'd feast in Valhalla, drinking beside the gods. In the Saga of the Volsungs, warriors prepared for battle by burning incense, invoking Odin, and chanting battle songs. This wasn't just violence, it was sacred duty. So when a Viking warrior walked onto the battlefield, he wasn't just armed, he was transformed. Each scarred shield, each notched sword, each dented helmet told a story, a legacy written in blood, iron, and fire. Glory in battle may have been the dream, but the daily grind of being a Viking warrior, that was a different story. Between fights, Viking warriors had to survive, and survival wasn't glamorous. These weren't pampered elite troops lounging between campaigns. They were cold, hungry, and exhausted more often than not. Let's start with food. A Viking warrior's diet was built for endurance, not pleasure. Most days began with a coarse bread, made from barley, rye, or oats, baked flat and hard. It was dunked in broth or ale to soften it enough to chew. Porridge was the go-to staple, made with grains and water or milk, and sometimes mixed with dried berries, nuts, or bits of lard if they were lucky. Protein came from dried fish, smoked meats, or occasionally boiled goat or pork, salted to keep for long voyages or raids. Fresh vegetables were rare in winter. Salt and dried herbs did what they could for flavour. But this wasn't a Viking buffet. If a warrior was on campaign, he might go days with nothing but dried meat, water, or watered-down ale. Rest, almost a luxury. On the home front, warriors slept in longhouses, wooden communal halls packed with family, livestock, and smoke. Privacy was non-existent. You'd sleep fully clothed, under wool blankets or animal pelts, often on straw-stuffed bedding. And if it was winter, you were grateful for the shared body heat. On a raid or march, you curled up in a cloak on the hard ground, rain or shine. Vikings learned to sleep lightly. Any rustle in the night could mean danger. The real toll, though, it wasn't just physical, it was mental. Constant warfare, harsh winters, the threat of death, losing comrades, carrying injuries that never truly healed. Some sagas hint at this burden. In Grettir's saga, Grettir the Strong, once a proud warrior, spends years alone, hunted and haunted. He becomes paranoid, restless, bitter. It's a rare glimpse into the psychological toll that Viking life could take. Even hardened warriors weren't immune. Those who lived through multiple battles bore scars you couldn't see. PTSD, anxiety, even survivor's guilt likely existed, though the Vikings had no words for it. So how did they cope? Many warriors turned to the gods, especially Odin, god of war and wisdom. Offerings were made before battle. Some carried Thor's hammer pendants around their necks, seeking strength and protection. Others believed that runes carved into weapons or skin could ward off fear or sharpen resolve. Ritual mattered. Some Viking warbands observed blot, where sacrifices were made to the gods before combat. Animals were offered, blood was spilled. Sometimes even human sacrifices were made, all to earn favour, all to find meaning in chaos. Because when death was always a day away, belief was the armour they couldn't afford to forget. Behind every heroic saga is a man who slept in the mud, ate hard bread, and buried his brothers. Life as a Viking warrior wasn't just about the glory, it was about endurance, physical, mental, spiritual. Steel may have been their weapon, but honour was their foundation. Viking warriors lived and fought by a code that went beyond loyalty to a chieftain or the promise of treasure. It was about reputation, brotherhood, and something the Norse called drengskaper, the noble way of being. To be a drenker meant you were brave, honourable, and stood by your word. It wasn't just about how you fought, it was about how you lived. In the chaos of battle, when the shield wall was shaking and blood painted the earth, a Viking warrior didn't just rely on his own strength, he relied on the man beside him. Brotherhood wasn't a slogan, it was survival. Warriors trained together, bled together, mourned together. They memorised each other's rhythms, shield placements, even the way they breathed under stress. That kind of connection wasn't forged overnight. It took years of shared hardship, scars, and fire. In the saga of the Jomsvikings, warriors of the elite brotherhood swore oaths to one another. No man could flee from battle. No man could insult another within their halls. And if one Jomsviking was killed, vengeance was not optional, it was duty. Honour was everything. If a Viking fled from battle or failed to avenge his kin, the shame followed him forever. Not just him, but his descendants. Your deeds echoed through time, sung in halls, whispered in markets, carved into stone. Dying with courage was better than living in disgrace. This wasn't romantic fluff, it was cultural law. Cowardice could lead to exile, mockery, or even execution by your own people. But with that code came pride. When warriors died, they wanted their names remembered. That's why sagas exist. That's why runestones were raised. To speak a man's name was to keep him alive. There were oaths too, to your jarl, to your blood, to the gods. Breaking an oath was worse than death. In Gisli's saga, the outlaw Gisli defies the odds for years to avenge his blood brother Vestine, because he once swore an oath of loyalty. Even when the law hunted him, and his own family begged him to let it go, Gisli held firm. That was the code. So while the outside world may remember Viking warriors as raiders and killers, among themselves, they were bound by something deeper, a code of kinship, a warrior's bond that bloodied but never broke. A Viking could lose his sword, his shield, even his home. But if he lost his honour, he lost everything. No saga can fully prepare you for the chaos of a Viking battlefield. This wasn't orderly, neat warfare. It was loud, violent, blinding. A sudden eruption of scream, of steel and blood. One moment you were marching. The next, you were in a storm of death. Picture it. Dozens of men charging down a hill. Shields raised, axes swinging. The roar of war horns, the clash of shield walls. A thunderclap of wood and metal echoing across the earth. Blood sprays. Someone screams, someone falls, and you keep fighting. The Viking shield wall was a brutal ballet. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked tight like a wall of moving ironwood, spears thrust through gaps, axes swung over the top. If one man fell, another stepped forward. It was unity, or death. Training wasn't optional here, you needed to trust the man beside you. If he lost his nerve, the wall would break. And when it broke, that's when the killing really began. There were no timeouts, no mercy. You fought until one side fell, or ran. Battles weren't won just by brute strength. They required cunning. Viking commanders often used feigned retreats, ambushes, and terrain to their advantage. They struck from boats, from forests, under the cover of storms. Surprise was their ally. Ferocity was their trademark. But the cost of battle was high. Even if you won, you didn't walk away clean. You limped off, bleeding, carrying shattered bone and the weight of what you'd done. You lost friends. You might lose an eye, a finger, a future. And you lived with it, because warriors weren't supposed to mourn. They were supposed to fight. Some loved it. For some, war was a drug. The adrenaline, the honour, the closeness to the gods. They believed dying in battle meant a seat in Valhalla, where the mead flowed and every day ended in glorious combat, only to rise again. But real battle wasn't glorious. Not always. It was slipping in blood, watching a friend die screaming, pushing through pain so deep you forgot your own name. And yet, Viking warriors returned again and again. Why? Because that was the life they chose. Or maybe it was the only one they ever knew. If you survived enough battles, you earned prestige, land, or a place at a jarl's table. But aging wasn't kind. Old warriors carried scars, limps, lost fingers, half a face. Some became thingmen, bodyguards to kings. Others retired to farming, mentoring young fighters. Still, most longed for one last battle, one final chance at glory. Some sought death in raids or duels. Better to die in blood than fade into obscurity. To be a Viking warrior was to carry the weight of your clan, your gods, and your honour. Their lives were short, violent, and unforgettable. And though centuries have passed, their echoes still ring. In sagas, in steel, in the spirit of defiance. If you found this glimpse into Viking warrior life compelling, give us a like, subscribe for more Norse history, and tell us, could you survive a day in the boots of a Viking?